Hey everyone, Jeremy here. I just wanted to show off these pictures that I had done in pastel pencil and kind of go over my process that I use to create these, arguably beautiful pictures. It's not as hard as you may think. There is some prep work you have to do though, because there's kind of like a special way of preparing your paper if you don't want to, spend a lot of money. There are some products out there that you can use for pastel pencils. When it comes to the paper, you can get something called pastel mat or sanded paper, but generally those things cost a little bit more than I would like to spend, especially since I'm still practicing and kind of learning my process. So I think I've worked out a way here where you get kind of the texture of those type of surfaces without spending a lot of money. So in this project, I'm actually using watercolor paper. This isn't something that I invented myself. It's actually something I learned about fairly recently, and uh, now I'm a huge fan. I think I'll do a lot of pastel pictures this way. So I wanted to share this process with you, uh, just as a sort of an endorsement. So, like I said, I started with watercolor paper, and you could use pastel pencils on watercolor paper. I've done it in the past, but one of the things that you start noticing pretty quickly is that your pastel doesn't really stick to the paper very well. It doesn't get down into the tooth of the paper, and that could be a problem. You can do it if you're just practicing or just trying to like put together a simple picture. But you'll find that as soon as you start getting into like blending some of the pastels or putting on multiple layers of the pastels, you're going to run into some problems. So working with watercolor paper by itself, it's not the best scenario. There's something you have to do to the watercolor paper first in order to make it work. So the way sanded paper works is it provides this kind of like textured surface. It feels a lot like sandpaper, and it allows you to get that pastel in between the grooves of the. Well, first off, the grittiness of it is going to pull the pigment out of the pencil, or pastel sticks if that's what you're using. In this video, I'm using pastel pencils. But if so, what pastel is it's kind of it's basically powdered pigment that has a binder that kind of holds it all together. And when using it on like a textured surface like sandpaper or something like that, it pulls that powdered pigment out. But if there's no tooth to the paper, it's not going to hold it in. So that's what we're trying to create here, and we're trying to create it on a budget. I'm just starting with the watercolor paper, and to start out, I'm applying just some acrylic paint to kind of give it a color. You can do like a full underpainting here. It really doesn't matter what you do. It's this product that I just showed, the clear gesso. The clear gesso is what gives you that sandiness. Now, I'm not using much. I'm only using maybe less than a tablespoonful. And this is 8 by 8 inch paper, by the way. So less than a tablespoon for 8 by 8 paper. You can use a little bit more if you have larger paper, but it doesn't take much. As you can see on my little foam palette here, it's just a small amount. And you really only have to add one layer of this stuff. What this clear gesso does is it has like a little sand in it. I don't know exactly what it is. I think I heard that it's like marble dust, but don't quote me on that because I'm not really sure. The point is that it's got effectively sand in it, and it's got basically a glue that dries clearly, some sort of binder that gets it on the page. And as it dries, it leaves the texture of the paper kind of like sandpaper. Um, it's important to get a good thorough coating of it, but it doesn't take much to do that. As I said, it really only takes like the one coat to get that much sand into the paper. And then what that sand's going to do is, as you're working with your pencils, it's going to grind your pencil. Not so much where you're like just burning through your pencils, but it's going to pull that pigment out and adhere to the paper. And yeah, and that's really the secret to preparing a surface on the cheap. I think pastel mat you can probably get for maybe like $2 a sheet or something like that. Don't quote me. I don't know. Like you might be watching this in the far future and it may be far more expensive than that, but it is not a very cheap thing if you're still learning and still practicing, because if you ruin that paper, you're out a few bucks. This product is only $14 for like a an 8 ounce bottle, as you saw in the picture. I think I paid 14 bucks for that at Michael's Crafts. I think it's about the same price other places. So like I looked at some art stores before I went to Michael's Crafts and online, because I thought, well, I'll just order it online, but it turned out to be the same price whether in the store or online. So I just went off and went to the store out of convenience. And I think it would be the same at maybe Hobby Lobby, but it's $14 for an 8 ounce bottle. And as you can see, you only use a little bit of it each time. So that'll end up giving you way more art projects than buying individual sheets of pastel mat or sanded paper, which again, adds up. So when I'm applying this gesso, you just want to make sure that you have a nice coverage. You want to make sure that you don't leave any streaks in it. You want to make sure that like any sort of texture is kind of blended into the watercolor paper. I should mention one of the reasons why you do apply the acrylic paint, and it really doesn't have to be acrylic paint. It could be watercolor. It could be any sort of underpainting, but that kind of, as you can see, the watercolor paper itself is textured. It's got some texture to it. This is a cold pressed watercolor paper, but you want to kind of fill in all of those little grooves and stuff like that. It's just easier when you go to use the pastel pencil if all those grooves are kind of filled in, because so this is my project. I'm working on my dog. This is Guinness, by the way, in case you guys have been watching my live videos. Um, this is like one of my favorite pictures of Guinness. So whenever I want to try something new, I come back to this picture and I try to duplicate it. So as you can see on the left, which is the finished drawing, it works really well. So that paper is just like sandpaper. I mean, it's just like you're drawing on sandpaper. I wish I had the audio here so that you can hear the pencil scraping across the paper, because it is like running your hand across sandpaper. It's really kind of cool. It's a cool texture. So as you can see, it works really well for blending. I just put down like a very light layer of pencil, and then I come in with the blending stick and just kind of blend it out, and it adheres to the paper and it holds that pigment really well. And what's nice about it is you can work in layers. So this very first layer is way too light. There's no detail to it. It looks very like washed out. Um, but if you come back over it and start adding more pigment to it, you start getting a real painting out of it. And they call this pastel painting. I've always considered it drawing, but when you look at it from this standpoint, where you're applying these different layers and you're using the color, it is like painting. Um, so these pencils that I'm using, I've got some cheaper pencils that I'm kind of using for the base layer, just because they work really well for base layers, but they don't work really well for details coming back over and creating additional layers. So what I'm using now is these new Derwent pastel pencils that I've got, and I can definitely recommend those. They're a very nice soft pastel pencil, and they allow me to come back in and build layers above that initial layer, and add some of the details that you see in the picture on the left. But yeah, this is a fun one. So like Guinness is such a sweet dog, and I really enjoy drawing his picture. My other dog, Bear, she's getting a little bit jealous that I keep doing these pictures of Guinness. But I've had this picture for years, at least a year or two, and I had it up on Instagram. So when I first went looking for like a demo picture to work from, I grabbed that off of Instagram. It's not any slight against Bear, even though she thinks it is. So I really need to do a portrait of Bear soon. But Guinness is a nice short-haired black dog, so it's really easy to practice with. But as you can see, just adding more and more layers, you're starting to get those tonal values of shadows and the highlights on this dog kind of come through in the underpainting. The lighting isn't all that great on the right side, but there's a reason I chose the blue underpainting because the room that Guinness was in was blue, so his black fur kind of reflects the blue from the room. So that kind of shows through in the picture. Again, it's a little washed out on the lighting. Sorry about that, but so that's the highlights for this dog. I don't really have to spend a lot of time on the highlights because of that underpainting. And this is a good point. So when dealing with acrylics or watercolor underpaintings for your pastel pencils, there's really no reason why it has to be like a solid blue square like what I've got here. You can get, and I kind of wish I did it on the second picture, which I'll show here in a moment, and I'll comment about that when we get to it. But you can do almost a full painting in acrylics or watercolor, and then just come back with these pastel pencils and finish off some of the details. Give it that that pop that maybe you might not be able to get in acrylics. And now, if you have if your skill set is acrylics or watercolor, just do the entire thing in watercolor. But I really like working with pastel pencils. It's a great medium. I feel like I have a lot of control over my marks. I feel like I can put in a lot of detail that I personally cannot paint. Maybe somebody else can. Great. I'm glad you can do that. But I enjoy drawing. It's so much fun for me. It's relaxing to make all of these little tiny marks in pencil. And for that, pastel pencils are great because you get best of both worlds. You get to do the layering. Actually, I should talk about that as well. So, like, you can do all of this in colored pencils as well. Don't get me wrong. You could do almost this exact same picture in colored pencils. But what I like about pastel pencils is that, you get to work a lot more quickly. You can blend with your finger like I just did. You can blend with a blending stump. You don't need any additional stuff. Like I did a colored pencil picture recently where I used acetone to do the blending. You don't need any of that. It's just powder. It's just a stick of powder, and you can work really quickly. So here's the finished picture of Guinness. As you can, so I zoomed in really far so that you can see some of that detail that you can get through the pastel pencils. So this is the second project that I'm working on. This was actually part of a live stream. So if you wanted to go and watch that full live stream, it took me 2 hours during the live stream, and I didn't get it finished, so I had to come back and finish it up the next morning. But yeah, same process. I started with a like an underpainting of acrylics, applied that clear gesso to it so that it becomes like sandpaper, and then the magic is just there. You can come in and work with those pastel pencils. You're not going to be sliding all over the page. The pencils are going to adhere to the watercolor paper. The first one I was using some cheap generic watercolor paper, the square. This one is Canson watercolor paper. Again, it's a cold press watercolor. You could probably use hot press as well. I don't really know. I've always used cold press. Um, but yeah, by applying that underpainting, you get rid of some of the texture of the paper itself, and you just end up relying on that clear gesso that goes over it to provide that sandy texture that you need for the pastel pencils. Um, but yeah, so the process here is a little bit different because I was doing it on a live stream and I didn't know how much I could get done in one session. So I started with the head and kind of wanted to make sure that I at least got the head in there for the live stream. Usually I work, the full picture at one time. So before coming in and adding details to his face, I would have probably put down as much black on his fur as I could, and then come back and do some detail. But this one took a little bit longer. The first one I did, just because of how slow I work, took about 2 hours. This one took about 4 hours. And the 4 hours was just in, me chatting with people as I'm working. I did put in a background on this dog just because he's on this he's on this beach, and I thought it was really cool. Like I think like the dog without the context of the scenery would have been not as great. So this is one of my friend in the UK's dogs, and they live like on the beach and everything. So the beach is part of the story as much as the dog is. So I wanted to capture both. Not every portrait requires both. You can have a dog without a background, just put in like a subtle background. But in this case, I definitely wanted to do a little bit of landscaping as well. But I think that that's kind of cool. You know, I get to show off that it does work for landscaping as well. You can do a landscape picture in this, the same as you can do a portrait. I didn't put a lot of detail into the landscape here, but there's really no reason why I couldn't have added flowers and trees and stuff. That's just not in the environment that this dog was, but I could have put more detail in there. I left it a little bit kind of like blurry and less detailed just for contrast to show the contrast between the dog and the actual background. You can see that little transition from where I finished one night and started the next. Um, but yeah, so if you are a pastel artist or just looking to get into doing pastel work because you're curious and you don't want to spend a lot of money, you looked into pastels and you looked into like what you should use for your pastel paper, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of money. $14 for a bottle of the clear gesso. I use the Liquitex brand, but I think it would work with some of the other clear gessos. There's even recipes online for creating your own clear gesso. But I was concerned about the archival quality of it, and I just don't know enough to attempt to make my own. I don't know if it's going to stand up over time, but I'll do some more research on that. And if I come up with an archival method for creating your own clear gesso, I'll definitely share that. The marble dust isn't that expensive. Like you can get a bag of marble dust for like $4. So yeah, so $14 for an 8-ounce bottle of clear gesso. Not really what I want to spend. I want it to be less than that, but you do get a lot of pictures out of that bottle. So in my case, I'm like, oh, okay, well that's fine. I can suck that up. Especially when I really want my pencils to shine, because these are really nice Derwent pencils, and I really wanted to get full value out of those by doing a proper picture. So yeah, and you know, there's other surfaces as well if you want to look into those. Like I said, pastel mat, sanded paper, and so on. But you're really going to start adding up the costs if you start going that route with the various different uh, ways that you can use pastel. I like this clear gesso. I kind of want to try this on canvas as well, and maybe wood, just to see if it works the same as on watercolor paper. I see no reason why it wouldn't, and if I can do pastel on wood, that sounds like a fun project. So anyway, that's really all I have to share today. I just wanted to show off these pictures mostly, but also I wanted to explain the process because I'm definitely going to be using it more in the future. I thought you guys might enjoy it as well. Some of the people who watch this show have been working with pastels, so hey, next time you're at Michael's, pick up a bottle of this clear gesso, and you know, give that a shot. See if that doesn't improve your pastel pictures. So anyway, thanks for allowing me to share that. If you liked what you saw today, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, so I can bring more of these to you in the future. Otherwise, have a great day. See ya. Bye.